Every country, every organization, want to make tremendous growth like China and its organizations are doing. It seems that China is doing miracles. If you want to how such miracle happened, these videos will give in-depth of knowledge. Here is some physical comparison of China in 70s and now that can prove that nothing is impossible. We start from a documentary of 1973 that was filmed in Shanghai. The host identified a number of challenges for Chinese peoples and it is very astonishing to see that in last 50 years almost every challenge is fulfilled. Let's see what he wants to highlight in their documentary.
For anyone old enough to remember, Shanghai looks much the same as it did a quarter of a century ago. A generation has not changed the face of Shanghai as much as it has changed its soul. Shanghai's past reflects the glory not of the Chinese Empire, but of the British Empire. The Chinese would not have built a city this way. The history of modern Shanghai was written in the logs and ledgers of our great-grandfathers, Englishmen, Frenchmen, and Americans. What brought them here was a revolution of their making, the Industrial Revolution. China became part of an expanding world market and Shanghai its marketplace. The noble commodities were tea and silk. The ignoble commodity was opium. Our idea of foreign trade was to sell opium in exchange for the tea and the silk. It was a trade the Chinese neither wanted nor valued. We fought a war called the Opium War to open China to the world in 1842. Shanghai means on the sea. We do not think of China as a maritime country, but Chinese invented the compass, the watertight compartment, the fore and aft sail, and the stern-post rudder. In the 14th century, China was the most technologically advanced country in the world. Proud and complacent, by the 20th century, the Chinese were left far behind the industrialized West. Proud but no longer complacent, the Chinese have been working hard to catch up. Shanghai today has many ancient ways and modern problems, like the traffic jam. The waterway is the city's most heavily used highway. Rivers, more than roads or railroads, crisscross China in every direction, and Shanghai has always been the most important truck stop. Everything moves on the river. There is no energy crisis in Shanghai. Machinery has not yet replaced manpower as the greatest natural resource. Shanghai is building its own trucks and buses and even passenger cars now. But modern transportation has not overtaken the old. They coexist, along with a small fleet of leftover American DeSotos, Fords, and Plymouths, for official use only. If you get run over in the streets, chances are it will be by a bicycle. There are more than 1 million bicycles and bicycle bells. And thousands more attached to carts. China's problem is to move not just Shanghai, but 800 million people from the past to the future. The Chinese can't rush head-on into the 20th century. They have to get there in their own way. Shanghai's primary need was simply to find many people a place to live. Just a generation ago, thousands lived and died in the streets. No one lives in the streets anymore, except to escape the summer heat. There is no escape from the crush of humanity. Today, Chinese are encouraged to postpone marriage at least until age 25, and then to have no more than 2 children. Birth control is now government policy. There are still places here that look and feel centuries old. Where for centuries there was nothing but fields, there is something new, China's first modern suburb. About 1 million people, including several 100,000 young people, have been relocated from the inner city to the suburbs and beyond to the interior. The government is anxious to spread development and industry. It is learning that modernization has its price. That inevitable sign of progress, pollution, is not yet a major problem. But China's planners aren't ignoring it. They can't. There are growing signs of pollution everywhere in Shanghai. For the first time, the city is facing the urban realities that are well known in the West. There were other big city problems that Shanghai inherited from the West and solved. They were declared illegal. One was opium. The opium den was a major commercial enterprise. There were hundreds of them and thousands of addicts. They made millions of dollars for the Shanghai underworld, for foreigner and Chinese alike. Shanghai was a wide-open port where fortunes were won and lost, and where anything was available for a price. There are no two-car garages either. There are no privately owned cars. And there are no washing machines or freezers or television sets in any of these homes. There are no mortgages or credit cards.
After the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, Chinese leaders are developing strategies that are wakening the dragon among Chinese people. According to the World Bank report, as a result of these policies, China's economy went from being low income to low middle income in 1997 and then to upper middle income in 2010. In 2019, China went from being a nation riven by civil unrest to having the second largest GDP in the world, with almost 800 million people have lifted themselves out of poverty. We will discuss here how China's economy has developed more rapidly than any other country in history. The rapid economic growth emerged from the vision late paramount leader Deng Xiaoping, who introduced capitalist reforms into a communist-planned economy in 1978. In this video, we will discuss about China's history, human resource development models, managerial and leadership policies, educational reforms, and its overall impact on economy by the end of 2000. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Let China sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world." Well, China is wide awake now and is the second largest economy in the world. Professor Kishore Mahbubani, who was also former president of the United Nations Security Council, has rightly linked China's progress with its history.
Because China's future will be determined by 4,000 years of Chinese history. I mean, 4,000 years of history, there are all kinds of cultural impulses, cultural norms, cultural roots, and so they are at play within Chinese society. And I want to add another point. If the Chinese Communist Party was not in conformity, broadly speaking, with the deeper cultural roots of China, it couldn't survive.
During the time of Chairman Mao, the Chinese tried the communist model with their own modifications and it failed. Here again Professor Kishore Mahbubani has identified revised game-changer strategy.
I watch China as an outsider. It is fascinating to see the return of China because China is clearly struggling. It's struggling to find the balance between adopting a lot of Western norms, like free market economics, and at the same time keeping its own norms, and then blending them. And sometimes they blend them so ingeniously, I wonder how the hell they do it. But at the end of the day, you have to judge China by the results. And the fact that they have gone from having 1/8 the size of the Chinese GNP to, only being a few percent smaller is an amazing achievement. How did they do it, right? It wasn't just by copying from the West. It's also by using some of their strengths. And that's something that we have to understand. You have to understand China on Chinese terms and how they view it. And it's not easy.
After the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, Deng Xiaoping rose to power and led China through a period of reform and opening up that transformed China's economy into a socialist market economy. World remember him as the architect of modern China that were due to his contributions to socialism with Chinese characteristics. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more. By 1978 Deng was itching to get the country moving forward and fast. His visit to Singapore then became known as something of a widely heralded crash course in rapid state-driven, capitalistic economic development, with Li as friendly collegial tutor. We have listened the term, why to reinvent the wheel? To reinvent the wheel means to waste one's time working on creating something that has already been created by someone else. However, like was clear that, it is silly to think they will just copy us. They look at us and say, well, will this work in China? Where they think something will work, they take that particular segment and but graft it onto their system with some alterations. Deng launched a period of reform and opening up, intending to use lessons from more developed nations like Japan, Singapore, the United States, and Europe to help China escape its poverty and backwardness.
You once said to me that the person you most admire that you have known in your life was Deng Xiaoping. Because he single-handedly put China on that course.
Yes, because at the age of 70 plus, having been a lifelong communist, he spent just over a week visiting Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore in November of 1978 and saw 3 backward countries
that had turned around,
doing better than China.
You and I had a conversation once about a whole range of leaders, and you said to me the man that you most admired of all the people you'd ever met was Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah.
That's what you told me.
Yeah.
Deng Xiaoping admired you too because he sent Chinese, 30, 40,000 of them, to Singapore to figure out what you were doing. Am I right?
Yes.
What was it you were doing that he wanted to see?
He was astonished when he came for the first time in 1978 to tell us to prevent Vietnam from invading Cambodia because they're doing it on behalf of the Russians. Then he found a Singapore which was contrary to what he was given in his brief.
Yes.
He found a prosperous, orderly society, everybody owning their own homes and with a job. So I said, how did you get there? I said, well, we educated our people. And look at all these companies, Americans, Japanese, Europeans. They bring technology, they train our people, we learn how to do things. And because we're cheaper, after a while we become general managers and company managing directors. And we learn how to do that and we become suppliers to them. So he said, oh, you made use of capitalism to build a more egalitarian society. Everybody owns their own home. I will do the same.
And he did.
He did. He did. He went back and declared 12 special economic zones. Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Dalian, and so on. All the coastal cities, and it succeeded.
So he was the greatest man you ever met because he understood, because of the results. He changed the nation, and therefore...
He's a member of the old guard. He fought in the Long March.
Right.
He chased the KMT out across the Yangtze. He led the...
He was a victim of the Cultural Revolution.
Yes, but he was realistic. He knew the system was not working. He knew that they were going to end up down in a deep hole. And he decided, against all the advice of his fellow old guards, that we would change course.
And he had the brains and the power to pull it off.
Yes. And when they tried to stop him in 1992 from going too fast, he went down to Shenzhen and said, learn from all countries in the world. And most of all, learn from Singapore. The order is good, and they are a very prosperous society.
Like was of the opinion that Chinese want to learn Singapore's secrets. Right, no one wants to imitate a failure. So if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, Singapore today is one of the more flattered countries in the world. Like always knew that his obsession about China was in Singapore's long-term national interest. If a tiny vulnerable country like Singapore doesn't climb aboard and perhaps even slip into a seat behind the pilot engineer on the Chinese train, operating as a kind of unofficial backseat driver, it will be left dangerously behind. He has also steadily obsessed that if China itself didn't change dramatically, that train would never even leave the station and the whole region would be stuck without this huge economic engine. Like and Deng, the two leaders had in common extreme ambition, a determination not to let anything or anyone get in their way, and a shared sense of the Chinese people, everywhere, deserving a special place on the world stage. They first met when the diminutive, chain-smoking Deng, 74 years old, was still nowhere yet near the height of his powers on the mainland. Li, from the colossally smaller country south of the Malay Peninsula, was then approximately 2 decades younger and well into his powers over Singapore, though not so well known on the global stage. This was in 1978. The timing is important to appreciate. Li was worried about Singapore being left behind when China got back up to speed. In order to understand the whole picture, we look into China's history. Throughout the majority of recorded history, China was once a supreme power in science and technology, including gunpowder, paper, the compass, and movable type printing are 4 of China's most famous inventions, but in fact ancient China's achievements went far beyond these big 4. The big 4 were responsible for several inventions, including wheel and axle technologies, iron production, and imperial horsemanship. Like modern China, China was known for its great degree of innovation in the years preceding the 6th century. China was far ahead of the rest of the world in terms of technology. China boasted well-developed industry for salt and textiles. China's use of water power for twine spinning in the 13th century was already on par with that of its European counterparts in the 18th. Some have even gone so far as to say that these 4 major Chinese technologies are responsible for the birth of contemporary Europe. China was incredibly creative in many areas, including farming, crafts, astronomy, mathematics, and technology, and it both outpaced and influenced European technological advancements. In several areas, including metallurgy, shipbuilding, navigational methods, and many others, China regularly outperformed Europe by several centuries. Between the 6th century and the 13th century, China's technological development stalled, stagnated, and eventually collapsed, and its early technological leadership did not set the country on a modernization path. Innovation was in their bloodlines, they just need moment, when to waken the dragon in themselves and become again true leaders in science and technology, and Deng Xiaoping was the leader, who put them on that track of prosperity and innovation. We will look into what national and business strategies were adopted by Chinese leaders and to make these strategies effective, how concept of world-class HR was started in limited time of last 40 years. Beginning in 1979, China launched several managerial reforms. The central government initiated price and ownership incentives for farmers, which enabled them to sell a portion of their crops on the free market. In addition, the government established 4 special economic zones along the coast for the purpose of attracting foreign investment, boosting exports, and importing high-technology products into China. Economic control of various enterprises was given to provincial and local governments, which were generally allowed to operate and compete on free market principles, rather than under the direction and guidance of state planning. In addition, citizens were encouraged to start their own businesses. In the field of VET, China has conducted international benchmarking reviews and created partnerships with a number of countries, in particular Germany, Japan, Singapore, UK, and Australia, but also Sweden and, more recently, with US community colleges. If China need to develop world-class HR, who can work for world-class organizations, there was epic need that someone train them. It was not possible to send so many people for foreign training, but it was possible to train them in-house by renowned world-class organizations and their expert. This journey started with Deng Xiaoping's famous talk on the introduction of talents on July 8, 1983, an increasing number of foreign talents and professionals have come to work in China. their work has contributed to the country's development. Since the first group of foreigners settled in China, the government has formulated and adopted many policies for managing and serving foreign talents. State Education Commission, together with the China Education Association for International Exchange, connected and cooperated with the English Language Institute, Educational Services Exchange with China, American Retired Teachers Organization, British Overseas Service Agency, etc., to bring more foreign language teachers into China. By the end of 1983, there were 3,921 long-stay foreigners in Beijing. This figure tripled to 12,076 at the end of 1987. The number of foreign talents, including foreign experts, technicians, and students also increased correspondingly. China's HR development model was very effective at that time. As an example, the Shanghai Construction Group, a state-owned enterprise that was founded in 1953 as the Construction Bureau of the Shanghai government. The company recruits 1,500 people per year, 60% from universities and 40% from the vocational track. The school has the most up-to-date equipment for tunnel construction and construction simulations. Construction managers from the company teach in the school, as well as teachers with more academic engineering backgrounds, who are also sent to work in the construction company in the summer. The curriculum is constantly adjusted to follow new developments in construction, and the company houses a research center on innovation in construction. In order to develop talented workforce, each province has developing its own strategies and policies. For example, after the launch of the Reform and Opening Up policy in 1978, Guangzhou has transformed from a planned economy to a market economy, becoming deeply involved in the global economy and in international competition. In the process, the city has encouraged and facilitated the free inflow of talent, investing tremendous financial resources in attracting overseas talents in order to catch up with Western developed countries. As one of the earliest cities to undergo opening up, it has aimed to attract talent from both home and abroad. In 1999, Guangzhou's municipal government issued the first talent recruitment policy, entitled Guangzhou Municipality Regulations on Encouraging Overseas Returnees to Work in Guangzhou. Since then, the city has issued new policies almost every year in a bid to attract high-level talent from overseas. China is evolving its HR and talent policies to compete the world in terms of quality, productivity, and innovation. At the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, more than 80% of the population was illiterate. But from the start of Deng Xiaoping's opening up and reform or open door policies, education has been a major focus. As late as the mid-1970s, only 1 in 4 students actually graduated from primary school. The most rapid development has come in the decades of the 1980s, 1990s, and since 2000. This has been, in fact, the most rapid period of educational development in Chinese history. In the 1980s, schools reopened, and both primary and junior secondary enrollments rose gradually. In 1986, a new law guaranteed children 9 years of compulsory education as a right, 6 years of primary and 3 years of junior secondary, with the target of achieving this by the year 2000. During the 1980s, the emphasis on vocational education was renewed, and since the 1980s, VET has expanded substantially. In the 1980s and 1990s, VET schools and colleges expanded enormously in scale but had major problems of quality. Tianjin Sino-German Vocational and Technical College was founded as a training center in the mid-1980s, shortly after the opening up of China. It was a joint venture between the German and Chinese governments in which Germany provided funds and technical assistance to help to develop German-style dual-system VET in several cities in China. This is the biggest cooperative project in education between Germany and China. The college was linked to a Chinese state-owned enterprise in steel production, which also had German experts. In the early days of developing the special economic zone in Shenzhen of Guangdong province, with 100 million people. At that time, the only people with the skills for infrastructure development came from the army. The joint ventures with foreign companies were in basic manufacturing, most workers had very low educational and skill levels, and companies had to invest internally in whatever training was needed to run their businesses. Foreign invested firms brought managers from their home countries and also invested significantly in training for their Chinese workers. China's limited pool of university graduates was also concentrated in the newly developing enterprises, especially in the coastal cities. Collaboration between Shenzhen Polytechnic and local industries began right from the start, especially in the design of curriculum. In the first 10 years, as the college was growing very fast, the curriculum was very focused on skills for immediate application on the front line. Shanghai Dianji University sits on a gigantic new campus that is being built in what will be the new Shanghai Free Trade Zone. Begun in 1953 as the Shanghai Electrical Machinery Manufacturing School. The university has pioneered relationships with state-owned and Chinese private enterprises in the Shanghai area. Each major has a board of 10 people drawn from industry and other vocational schools to advise on the curriculum. Graduates have a 100% employment rate. Since 1978, China has used internationalization as a way of driving internal reform. In the field of VET, China has conducted international benchmarking reviews and created partnerships with a number of countries, in particular Germany, Japan, Singapore, UK, and Australia, but also Sweden and, more recently, with US community colleges. China started to systematically revamping its scientific and education systems. When Deng Xiaoping met Tanzanian Vice President Mwinyi in 1985, he said it is impossible for any country to develop and isolate itself. Without strengthening international exchanges and introducing advanced experience, science, and technology and capital from developed countries, it is impossible. Recognition of the importance of international exchange demonstrated the willingness of the Communist Party of China, CPC, and the Chinese government to integrate into the international market. In 1981, the National Science and Technology Commission had reported initial guidelines for the development of China's science and technology. 4 years later, in March and May of 1985, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, CCCPC, released formal decisions to reform China's science and technology system as well as its educational system. Decision to reform China's science and technology system directly pointed out, at the same time of carrying out planning management for key national projects, we should use economic leverage and market regulation to make scientific and technological institutions have the ability of self-development and the vitality to automatically serve economic construction. University, industry cooperation was then adopted in the reform. Besides state-owned companies, private science and technology enterprises were also encouraged in improving the combination of scientific research and production. In addition, the industrial development sphere was supported by the Chinese government with special promotional policies in several intellectual resource-intensive areas. Such reforms helped to bring about the establishment of the new Technology Industry Development Zone in Zhongguancun in 1988. By creating a good environment for talents to emerge and people to do their best, individuals were allowed to establish scientific or technological service institutions and could get support and help from central or local governments. Improvement in science and technology could not take place without personnel exchange. As reflections of the two decisions, not only were Chinese scholars and scientists able to conduct international activities abroad, but in addition foreign researchers were welcome to do research in China. China adopted three-pronged strategy, for educational reforms, b. enhancing local education infrastructures and quality of education and training, secondly by collaborating with foreign universities and training institutes, and thirdly b. starting exchange programs. This strategy proven so effective, that we can observe that China's workforce is far ahead in many areas of science and technology, manufacturing, innovation, quality, and productivity. To support rapid industrialization, the central government undertook large-scale investments in physical and human capital during the 1960s and 1970s. As a result, by 1978 nearly three-fourths of industrial production was produced by centrally controlled, state-owned enterprises, SOEs, according to centrally planned output targets. Private enterprises and foreign invested firms were generally barred. A central goal of the Chinese government was to make China's economy relatively self-sufficient. Foreign trade was generally limited to obtaining those goods that could not be made or obtained in China. According to Chinese government statistics, China's real GDP grew at an average annual rate of 6.7% from 1953 to 1978. In 1978, the Chinese government decided to break with its Soviet-style economic policies by gradually reforming the economy according to free market principles and opening up trade and investment with the West, in the hope that this would significantly increase economic growth and raise living standards. As Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, the architect of China's economic reforms, put it, "Black cat, white cat, what does it matter what color the cat is as long as it catches mice?" In the beginning of 1979, China launched several economic reforms. The central government initiated price and ownership incentives for farmers, which enabled them to sell a portion of their crops on the free market. In addition, the government established 4 special economic zones along the coast for the purpose of attracting foreign investment, boosting exports, and importing high-technology products into China. Economic control of various enterprises was given to provincial and local governments, which were generally allowed to operate and compete on free market principles, rather than under the direction and guidance of state planning. In addition, citizens were encouraged to start their own businesses. Trade liberalization was also a major key to China's economic success. Removing trade barriers encouraged greater competition and attracted foreign direct investment, FDI, inflows. China's gradual implementation of economic reforms sought to identify which policies produced favorable economic outcomes, and which did not, so that they could be implemented in other parts of the country, a process Deng reportedly referred to as crossing the river by touching the stones. This trial-by-error evolution allowed workable and localized transitions from one stage of economic development to the next. In the early 1980s, special economic zones were piloted in Shenzhen, near Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen, and 14 major coastal cities were opened up to foreign investment. These opened up China to foreign direct investment through the vehicle of joint enterprises. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan were particularly important investors and managerial partners in the early zones. Joint enterprises benefited from special legal regulations and tax incentives. As an example, to encourage processing of goods for export, joint enterprises were allowed to import raw materials duty-free. These initial zones were so successful that the concept was expanded. In 1984, 14 cities had special economic zones. By 1993, there were 2,000 of them. Not only did the CEZs require labor for production, but more importantly, the new target cities needed construction and services. It was also because of the CEZs that residency rules affecting rural-urban migration began to be relaxed in China. Chinese government opened the economy to external investment and manufacturing and finally embarked upon domestic industrial restructuring. This process required a complex and calibrated process of guided institutional change involving decentralization and fundamental changes in the enterprise culture. Several economists have concluded much of China's rapid economic growth to 2 main factors: large-scale capital investment that productivity gains, i.e., increases in efficiency, have been another major factor in China's rapid economic growth. The improvements to productivity were caused largely by a reallocation of resources to more productive uses, especially in sectors that were formerly heavily controlled by the central government, such as agriculture, trade, and services. These 2 factors appear to have gone together hand in hand. His reforms show that in the face of globalization, especially the globalization of science and technology, China has started to reform its fundamental scientific and educational systems so as to be more competitive and ultimately develop world-class human resource to support national and business strategies. Flexible industrial policies and deregulation of research institutions and researchers played vital role in awakening of China. According to human capital theory, knowledge and skills have become the most important force driving modern economies. Therefore, countries are investing increasing amounts of their GDP in education. The bottom line is that virtually everything that China wants to accomplish depends on a dramatic improvement in the productivity of the Chinese worker, which, in turn, depends on a dramatic improvement in their education, skills, flexibility, and ingenuity. Chinese leaders waken the dragon, and nation is on the verge of becoming leading country of the world by setting marvelous examples for developing countries, who can learn how to become a world-class nation in few decades. But first, countries need to identify their own strength and align them with lessons learned from China. I would like to say the Chinese leadership has proved nothing is impossible.